From the Blind Ability Studios, it's Wellness Wednesday with your hosts, Beth Gustin and Robin Ennis.
Hey everybody, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. My name is Robin Ennis, licensed clinical social worker in Colorado, and I am here with my co-host, Beth Gustin, licensed professional counselor, also in Colorado. And so we're coming to you today with the topic of modalities.
Different types of treatment modalities that a person might want to use to help with whatever challenges they're seeing a therapist for.
Yes, exactly. There's quite a few of them. And so today we're going to tackle the top three, which we thought of: cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, and narrative therapy. And those seem to be the top three, and we'll go more into detail along the way with them, but they can help with a variety of problems that a person may be facing, whether it be depression, anxiety, self-esteem, trauma, worthlessness, just a lot of things to help a person feel more grounded with themselves and to gain more reassurance along the way.
In cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and EMDR are both what's called evidence-based, meaning there's a lot of research behind them to prove that they work. I believe narrative therapy is as well, but I don't know if I've seen evidence-based tied to narrative therapy. And narrative therapy, we'll get into it more, but it's a little more existential, I guess you could say, which is not to say it's existential therapy, because that's different still. But we will talk about this more in depth, but we'll start with CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is used to treat, like Robin said, anxiety, depression. It focuses on one's patterns of thinking and patterns of behaving and works to help a client change those negative patterns into more positive ones. I know I made that sound really simple. It's not quite that simple.
Right. So you have all of these thoughts spinning around in your head, or what we call intrusive thoughts. I'm not good enough, or I can't do this. And so as a result of those thoughts, what happens? You believe that you can't do this, or you believe that you're not good enough. And so therefore you may not seek out a promotion, or you may not move forward in whatever type of goal that you have out of fear of letting yourself down or other people, or feeling like you're not good enough. And that's just one example. And so cognitive behavioral therapy seeks to challenge that thought by helping you reframe those thoughts that you have. Are you really not good enough? Like, what enables you to think that way? What are some evidence to show you that you're not good enough? And more than likely, whenever you're able to process those out loud, I find with clients, when they say it out loud or they process it to another person and they get that objective opinion and see how those thoughts are impacting their behavior, then that alone ends up helping a person change their action.
It does. And another way I like to talk about intrusive thoughts is I call them ants, automatic negative thoughts.
Oh, yep.
And so we want to get rid of the ants. And Robin just explained that very well, as far as it's about reframing and checking the facts. What evidence do I have this belief or thought is true? But if we typically find that we're just awfulizing and catastrophizing, and we don't have any evidence, these things are not really true about ourselves or the world around us, but we think they are.
I like that notion. I haven't heard of that, referring to it as ants. I really do like that, because I was visualizing that as you were saying that. And just like ants, you want to get rid of, they itch and they bother you. Well, so do automatic negative thoughts. And so trying to reframe them and be able to, just as easy as they enter into your head, trying to get them to enter out.
There's no room for ants.
No room for ants. Kind of like acting like your own pest control, trying to get rid of it. I tend to like cognitive behavioral therapy with my clients, especially like, let's say that those intrusive thoughts, they keep spiraling. One way to get it out is through journaling. And so that can be a cognitive behavioral exercise. So being able to get out your thoughts, what you're feeling and how that impacts you and what you could do differently. Or another thing that my clients do is a pros and cons list, right? So something that's bothering them. What are the pros of that particular situation? Or what are the cons? And based upon whether each list outweighs the other, then that can help them inform or make a decision that way. And so those are my two favorite things with cognitive behavior therapy, those exercises.
Those are actually my two go-tos as well. I also like a thought record, which Robin pretty much just explained, where you write down the negative thought, kind of analyze like what could you have done differently, kind of what brought on these thoughts. It's done by columns, and depending on when you use different things, you write down about each of those negative thoughts. But the goal is to visually be able to see you have a lot of evidence to actually refute these negative thoughts, and you can write some more positive reframes as you're processing the event and the thoughts that went with it. But journaling is one of the biggest, I think, helps for clients because it gives you a place to not only brain dump and get things out of your head, but as you're writing, you're also clarifying and processing along the way.
Yes. It can also be, you could write it down, or it could be also too art. Art therapy can be a form of getting it out in a different expressive way. I know I have a client who's very artistic, and in order to help him get out what he's feeling, he will draw. Actually, I have a few clients like that. One client actually draws during our sessions to be able to help him. And one client, whenever he's feeling anxiety, he will sit out and draw out what he's feeling.
I have the same as a lot of clients who like to use adult coloring sheets during sessions, and they will just talk and color. I've had a couple actually will do yoga poses during sessions because that helps them feel grounded enough to be able to talk. Or clients will fidget with fidgets during sessions. So whatever works for a person to help them talk. But drawing is a very popular one. It's very calming, I think, for a lot of people.
Yep, I agree. I do like the coloring books. When I worked for a particular crisis agency, for us counselors, they had adult coloring books for us to be able to engage in self-care ourselves and divulge in that. So yes, coloring books can be helpful too.
I want to be respectful of the length of our podcast, and so we're going to move forward and talk about EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And it is a form of therapy to help with a number of things, but it originally was developed to help with clients who experience trauma, such as veterans who've been in combat, for example. And the name eye movement, EMDR, is a little bit misleading because you don't have to only use your eyes to utilize this modality. But EMDR essentially says that you have a three-pronged approach. So you have your past traumatic event that is impacting your current present and causing you to react in ways you don't want to situations. And your goal is to create a future for yourself that is better where you're responding in a more positive, healthy way. And so EMDR uses what is called bilateral stimulation, which basically means you are engaging both right and left sides of your hemisphere, your brain, to access the maladaptive memory networks that get formed when a traumatic event occurs. And the goal is to clean out those maladaptive memories. We don't take them away. We can't erase them, but we can reduce the intensity of them as they come up throughout your life. And so with EMDR, you can either track a movement with your eyes by following your therapist's fingers or a pointer. You can hold tappers or pulsators in your hands that vibrate back and forth left and right. You can follow a light with your eyes that goes back and forth. You can tap on yourself. It's called the butterfly hug, which you can cross your arms and there's pressure points right by your collarbones. You can tap on those. You can use headphones with beeps that are audible, so you can have the alternating left and right with headphones. There's a number of ways you can do EMDR. And EMDR actually has 8 phases to it to complete the whole entire modality, starting with history and resourcing and grounding, all the way through reducing the negative belief about yourself, like I am not lovable. And then we install a positive belief to I am lovable. And then you look at making sure everything actually cleared out when you did the EMDR, making sure those memories are not as intense. And we do that with scaling questions, like a scale of 0 to 10. The lower the number, the less traumatic or troublesome that memory is. And so that's EMDR in a very quick nutshell. And I don't want to hog EMDR. So Robin, your turn.
Well, actually, you're the trained professional with EMDR, so I found it very rewarding listening to you. So thank you for sharing. And I do want to ask you, though, because I have heard with EMDR that clients can do it by themselves. So is that an option? Like, let's say a client can't see a therapist for EMDR because EMDR can be more expensive than traditional therapy. Are there ways that they could be able to learn how to do those techniques on their own?
So I encourage my clients to do the grounding and resourcing techniques on their own in between sessions because I want to make sure that they are able to tolerate the intensity of the negative memories as we're reprocessing them, because EMDR can be intense depending on what is coming up and what we are targeting. I do not encourage clients to practice the reprocessing part of EMDR on their own because I can't predict what's going to come up or how they're going to react to it. And if a client has an abreaction or abnormal reaction, they can potentially get stuck in that and not be able to pull themselves out. And that can actually do more harm than good, in my opinion. I personally don't charge any more for EMDR than I do for talk therapy. So I feel like it's another modality and additional tools in the toolbox, but I do think you should not do EMDR on your own.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And so I do agree, because the concern, and I had mentioned this before when I had heard the notion of you could be able to do EMDR on your own, is that fear of not being able to pull yourself out of that deep trauma that you're particularly going through. And I had talked about in the previous podcast is when you find a therapist, making sure that you have that rapport, that trust, because especially in this type of therapy, trust and rapport is very important to create that safe environment when you're diving deep into deep-rooted trauma like that. So yes, I do agree that it's important to be in a safe environment with a trained professional who can help you and guide you through that trauma, as well as being able to pull you out of it to help you feel more grounded. And so going off of EMDR, there's another type of similar modality that seems to be becoming more popular, and that's internal family systems theory. And this is where you view your body, your internal self, as different parts of you. And so if you think about it, thinking back to trauma, when it's the first time you felt scared or you felt some type of trauma that you can think about. Because if you think back to that time period, more than likely that's the age that you're still stuck at. Because whenever trauma exists and you feel like you have unresolved trauma, you can't really move beyond that particular age. And so you'll find that people who are trying to navigate their traumatic experiences will go back to a particular childhood memory, a particular point in time. And so I find that very much true with some of the clients that I talk to. And okay, so when you look at the different parts of yourself and trying to channel that inner child in you, where are you feeling that angst? Where are you feeling that feeling inside of you? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your heart? Wherever it may be, and trying to talk to that particular self, trying to calm that self and letting that part of you know that you're there and it's okay, and trying to navigate that pain until that pain has subsided.
I'll often ask my clients the question of like, how old do you feel when you're acting X? Mm-hmm. And most times they'll say, I feel 15 or I feel 5 or between 8 and 10. And it's like, okay, what happened at that time in your life? And what happened as we're adults is these younger parts of ourselves are trying to be helpful to us as a whole. And they're trying to use coping skills that used to work really well, but they don't work now that we're adults. And so one thing I'll have my clients do, if they're willing, is write a letter to this younger part. And we usually have more than one part, but we work with one part at a time in most cases. Write a letter to the younger part and talk about how this part is helpful to you, how this part is not helpful to you, and what you as an adult now are going to do to kind of help nurture this younger part so it doesn't need to hold all this emotion in me. And that can help clients, through journaling and through talking with your therapist, that can help clients get in touch with these parts and be really curious and compassionate towards them, and also help work with these younger parts so they don't have to disrupt, and give them some more helpful coping skills.
Exactly. That's what I do with my clients too, is encourage them to write a letter to the younger self, talking back as their adult self, or who they are now, versus, and offering some type of consolation to their younger self at whatever age they may be. It can be very, very helpful. I do like internal family systems therapy. I think both are a good modality, but I've seen a lot of emotion or a lot of progress in terms of internal family systems. That's the most that I've been witness to.
And you can interweave EMDR with internal family systems as well, and do EMDR with different parts of yourself. So those two blend themselves really well together as well.
And one may work better than another, or like Beth said, you can interweave them both together. Just like any modalities we talk about, it's trying to figure out which one works best for you. And so the last one that we're going to talk about is narrative therapy. And so this is really, it goes back again to being open and transparent with your therapist, because narrative therapy is diving into your story, your historical background on who you are as a person and how those narratives, those thought processes shape you into the person you are and have impacted the way that you navigate the world.
It looks at the stories we tell ourselves and asks a lot of questions around how those stories have impacted us growing up and kind of where they came from and why we tell these stories about ourselves to ourselves. And one technique in narrative therapy I like is helping clients externalize the problem. So instead of saying, I am blind, I might say blindness impacts me in these ways. Or instead of saying I'm an alcoholic, alcohol affects my life in these ways. And so by externalizing the challenge you're working with, it helps you take a step back and look at that story more objectively. So we're not so hard on ourselves as we're trying to help someone rewrite their narrative.
Right. So that we're not so hard on ourselves, and also too, so that we don't become so enmeshed in the problem or the story where you can't separate yourself from it. And you think that you are defined by the alcohol use, or you are defined by the blindness, or you may be defined by the illness, whatever it may be. It really is thinking of it objectively and separating yourself from the particular problem at hand. Because again, we have different parts of us, we have different identities of us, and not one particular problem or issue defines who we are. And so with narrative therapy, again, it's navigating it and trying to distinguish, because also too, it can be hard with narrative therapy to separate yourself from your story, especially if you're really feeling depressed or anxious, because in those moments you're feeling hopeless, or you're feeling like, again, that your particular circumstances are defining you. So your therapist can be that objective person to help you sort through whatever you may be telling yourself in that moment.
Exactly. And those are just 4 types of modalities, because we covered CBT, EMDR, IFS, and narrative. And those are just 4 of a multitude of modalities that are out there. So in the future, we are going to cover other modalities that you might want to learn about, or find a therapist who specializes in those modalities, because there's many.
Right. So the goal is to try and turn it into Modality Monday, talking about different modalities. And we really do encourage each and every one of you to reach out with a question or a comment, or even any story identifying information, of course, but a story or something if you want to be able to share with us that resonates with what we're saying. We would definitely love to hear from you. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, please reach out. And until next time, please take good care of yourselves, and we will talk to you next month.
Right. Until then.
You can send Beth and Robin a message at 612-367-6093 or by email at info@blindabilities.com. They'd love to hear from you.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the realities
of blind abilities.